so my beast known, my great grandmother was known as a witch in the community. And what she was doing was folk Catholicism. So that word strega, which is the Italian word for witch, in Italy was often seen as a derogatory term. And the practices that we might, like from a neo-pagan Wiccan perspective, that we would say were witchcraft, to them are Catholic.
Hello and welcome to Priestess of Ordinary Things, a podcast for spiritual misfits, modern mystics, and folks of all genders tasked with tending the sacred within everyday life. My name is Kate Fontana. I'm a psychic, a pagan priestess with Christian vibes, and mentor to the spiritual fringe. I help spiritual misfits like you connect in down-to-earth ways to your innate resilient center, and to nurture reluctant leaders on their sacred priestess path. Welcome. Welcome, Lisa, and all future listeners. I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you. So I'm here with maybe we'd say like peripheral colleague
Yeah,
in the field. I guess we met because you joined a program of mine several years ago.
I think so.
Were we in a group together of some other?
I don't remember, but I remember I did
Yeah.
join, I did your thing. But I knew you at that time and I don't remember why.
Yeah,
Maybe I knew who you were. You know when you know people on social media, sometimes it's hard to remember.
yeah,
Was
totally.
I in a Zoom
And
group with you somewhere? I don't know, maybe.
probably right. Yeah. But definitely like made contact, maybe more close contact with the Agape Sluts retreat.
Yes, yes.
Um, and then yeah, just kind of been in the mutual cultural healing arts field, ancestral work field, and I have been excited to chat with you. So if it's okay, I'd love to read your bio that you sent.
Sure.
Okay. So Lisa Fazio is a clinical herbalist, author, and folkloric witch, trained in traditional Western herbalism, Western astrology, and the ancestral healing ways of her Italian immigrant family. She has an academic background in psychology and ethnobotany, but her primary learning has been through direct experience with plants, place, and ancestors. She is the founder of the Root Circle, a mystery school focused on promoting and regenerating traditional healing practices as a form of ancestral reverence, sensual embodiment, and collaboration with the landscape in communication and alignment with the divine to the benefit of all beings, past, present, and future. Lisa teaches and writes about medicinal plants, ancestral connection, Italian folk medicine, and Mediterranean spirituality all over the United States, southern Italy, and Sicily. She's the mother of 4 children, a nonna, and resides on the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. Her most recent book, Della Medicina, The Traditions of Italian American Folk Healing, was released last year. So welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe we can begin. I often begin by just like trying to really get located with folks. So can you share about like your immediate ecology and like what does your human life in the world look like right now?
Yeah, so I live in the Adirondack foothills, which is in New York State. I'm in central New York, above the Mohawk Valley. This is Haudenosaunee traditional lands, Haudenosaunee or Iroquois traditional lands, specifically Mohawk. I live in a farming community. I live above the Mohawk Valley in another valley in the foothills. So we have like a little river. Um, it's a, it's really a post-agricultural community. Unfortunately, a lot of the family farms here
Mm-hmm.
have gone out, and it's also Rust Belt post-industrial, which means it's poor, but also rich in other things. So It's wild and undeveloped, partly because of the fact that it's post-industrial, and also partly because we're right on the edge of the Adirondack Park where
Mm.
development is restricted. So I live in a basically like the edge of a village, like a hedge witch.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that seems to make sense for the things that you're doing.
And then, and this is sort of important, I grew up in the city of Utica, New York, in an Italian enclave. So it's a small city, like 65,000 people, which a lot of Italian immigrants, for reasons well, I think because there was a lot of textile mills in Utica, and a lot of the immigrants that came were textile workers and tailors like my family. Um,
Mm.
and it had a greater percentage of Italian immigrants around the turn of the 20th century, the 1900s, than New York or Chicago. So, um, very strong influence there. And and I don't know if it's still, but it was at one point the fourth largest refugee center in the United States.
Mm. Like refugees of any
Refugees from
nationality or
all over. It
yeah.
started in like the early 70s with Vietnam. They started bringing in Vietnamese refugees, and now we've got refugees from all over the world. So, like at the public school in Utica, there are 45 different languages spoken.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So, there's a real contrast. So, I live in this like kind of remote, you know, rural community. Um, but the 30 minutes from here is where I grew up, and it's like a completely different place.
Yeah. Would you share a little bit about your ancestry? That feels like from land. How about your ancestry?
Sure, yeah. So, on my dad's side, my both of my grandparents were Italian immigrants. Um, my grandfather grew up in Calabria, in a little village where we still have family.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Where where is that ish in Italy?
Calabria is the toe
Got you.
of
Hmm.
the boot. Um, and my Nona, my grandmother, grew up in the city of Benevento, which is in Campania. Um, so they were both immigrants. And then on my mom's side, her whole line is from Ireland.
Hmm.
And they came before. There's different lines, so third, three, four generations
Yeah.
back. Um, I, I, my like, I was encultured as Italian American. I had
Yeah.
it, so that's kind of one of the things about it is when I started doing ancestral work, I was really wanting to do it with my Irish lineage. My Italian side didn't really feel like ancestry to me, if
Mm. Yeah.
because
Uh-huh.
it was something um, that it was alive for me. It wasn't something that had passed. Also, so I was born in 1970. I'm 54. When I was growing up, being Italian was not, we were discriminated against.
Right. Hmm.
So, I wanted to distance myself from my Italian heritage, and
Hmm.
I really did my best to do that. Um, it wasn't just discrimination that was there, but also just the overculture in general. You know, I wanted I wanted to look like Cindy Brady.
Yeah.
So, there was like kind of that like I feel like I was in, at like a juncture of assimilation where,
Yeah.
in my generation, so I'm second generation, was really like resistant to those very traditional values, um, the family being the center of existence as opposed to, you know, more Western individualism. So I had distanced myself from that.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's two very clear lines. And I did have my DNA done, and it but my dad was like, "We told you. Why did you need to have your DNA done?"
Just to check.
As a check, but I'm pretty much right down well, interestingly, the Italian side, there's no, Italian isn't really it's like Greek, it's like Mediterranean, there's like kind
Yeah.
of most of us are uh, you know, have Greek, North African, Middle Eastern, like a whole mix there.
Gotcha. So you said you started to pursue the Irish ancestry first, and then what happened?
Um, it just wasn't. Well, I did for a while, but as I could say this a few ways. It just wasn't where I was supposed to go.
Yeah.
I got
Uh-huh.
redirected, and I think there were practical reasons as well. For instance, as a practitioner, the skills that were available to me through my Italian line were like low-hanging fruit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whereas um I don't really know very much about like Irish folk medicine. I know a bit about like Celtic spirituality and whatnot, but I would say really other than the Catholicism that I grew up with from my mom's side, that was the only like direct contact that I personally had with anything that looked like folk medicine.
Yeah.
Whereas on my Italian side, it was a part of my everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of, I feel like it just pulled me. And it's kind of funny because um, you or any of your listeners who know anything about Italian culture, it has a very strong presence. So it tracked that these ancestors were like, no, you're coming with us.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the low-hanging fruit or like this was a part of your everyday life, like what was that? Or I mean, I'm not even sure that people would know what Italian folk medicine means. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't mean anything.
Great. Okay, cross that off.
Well, it's an umbrella term
Yeah.
for something that's not systemized.
Yeah.
That, um, I mean, Italy only became a unified country in 1861,
Okay, right. Uh-huh.
right? So, which is why most of us ended up here. It's called the Risorgimento. Um, the northern uh, armies came down, Garibaldi's march came down, basically invaded, took over southern Italy and Sicily. They started in Sicily with the premise of liberating
Mm,
the peasants. Um, and so even some of the peasants were behind it. But what ended up happening is the bourgeoisie in southern Italy just well, a bourgeoisie formed basically. Anybody who could get their hands on land, the land became privatized. Before that, it was Bourbons. It was a Bourbon monarchy. And so the land became privatized, and um, the peasants lost their common lands.
Hmm.
Um, and so they didn't have any way to grow food or
Subsist.
to subsist. And so there was a rebellion. There were rebels called the Briganti. Um, so they kind of were in a kind of like a guerrilla war, state of war for a while. Disease spread. Um, and there was mass emigration
Mm-hmm.
from
Hmm.
from Italy so that people could get jobs. Um, and so most of the people who left during that time period weren't didn't identify as Italian. They would have identified with their region,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they all had different languages.
Mm. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So standard Italian um, is the dialect of Florence.
Interesting. Okay.
So then they made that compulsory in all the public schools, only taught standard Italian. But so, for instance, my grandfather, he spoke his dialect, um, and then later learned Italian just to because some of his cousins spoke Italian. But
Mm.
um, and he did learn some Italian in school because he was in school. So so my grandmother came in before him. She was younger. He was in Italy during the rise of Mussolini. So he left in 1927. And so he had been educated in Italy. And so back to your question. So, what is Italian folk medicine? So you've got all these people from some from northern Italy, but predominantly from southern Italy and Sicily. Um, and they all moved into what we call enclaves, so Italian neighborhoods. So they moved out of largely rural communities into urban communities to work in the factories. So you had all these people who came together from different parts of Italy who had all different ways of doing things. A lot of the folk medicine was parochial, meaning it was so you'd have different techniques as well as sauce
Hmm.
recipes and
Hmm.
all, different patron saints in it from parish to parish
Yeah.
and even different languages. And so when they came here, they all lived together and um, what we call Italian folk medicine is a bunch of things put together from that area of the world, as well as the greater Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So, for instance, Sicily was an Arab emirate. Palermo was an Arab emirate, and Sicily was Arab under Arab rule for 300 years. And
Wow.
Calabria was as well for a certain amount of time. I'm not sure, not as long. Um, and
That is not a well-known piece of history. Yeah.
you still in Palermo, there's still the road signs in the centro in the old part of the city are still in Arabic. So, when we say Italian folk medicine, we don't mean that there's some standardized system. It's really a emergent folk practice. So in the United States, it's different. Some people call it benedicaria, which is a word that came out of the Italian American diaspora
Mm. Hmm.
and their practices, and they are in they're indistinguishable from Catholicism.
Mm,
So, um, our Catholicism was also very different when we came here. Um, During that time, it was really German and Irish had were in charge of the Catholic churches, and they had been anglicized to a large degree.
hmm hmm
So when the Italians came, um, so for instance, Italian folk Catholicism puts the patron saint above the Holy Trinity.
mm, hmm hmm
La Madonna, maybe you're going to put her up there as well, but their devotion and a lot of their practices were directed at their patron saints.
hmm
Um,
That
so
was the personal connection or and communal connection. Yeah.
so they put us in a lot of times in the basement to do our so my because my mom so my mom always said she's like I don't know why but they always put the Italians they had to go into the grotto to have their their church services they
So
had to
there
go
was specifically an Italian mass or
yes.
uh-huh.
And then we built our own churches. And we started
hmm
building like Our Lady of Mount Carmel was one of the first ones in the US. Um and so then, now a lot then the Italian neighborhood started cropping up with
hmm
their own parish. So the folk medicine and this is there's this it's very popular Italian witchcraft, is like a hashtag now and um it's very the idea of uh, a witchcraft tradition. Some people believe that there's was this like underground witchcraft tradition. A lot of that came out of the work of Charles Leland Godfrey, um, who wrote Aradia, the Gospel of the Witches.
Mm,
He was American, but he ended up living in Naples, and he has this whole story about some witch that he met that has been by ethnographers and anthropologists debunked.
hmm
But there's still people who believe it. And um so my grandmother as I mentioned was from the city of Benevento, which is called La Città delle Streghe, which is the city of witches. And my grandfather used to say, even the wind is bad there. It actually means Benevento means so. Um, so my beast known, my great grandmother was known as a witch, um, in the community, and what she was doing was folk Catholicism.
hmm
So that word strega, which is the Italian word for witch, in Italy was often seen as a derogatory term. And the practices that we might, like from a neo-pagan Wiccan perspective, that we would say were witchcraft, to them are Catholic.
hmm hmm like what? Can you give an example?
So the most popular one is the cures for the malocchio. So malocchio is the evil eye. Mal, bad, occhio, eye. Malocchio. Italian Americans usually call it the maloc. Um, Sometimes they call it the famaloc to make the maloc. And that involves a ritual to cure it. And water and oil are used, sometimes salt, sometimes there's no water and oil, sometimes it's just a series of prayers and gestures. Um, they can cure other things in this same way. The Malocchio is one of the most famous and the one that most people know about. In order to become somebody that can cure the Maloc, you have to receive a transmission from somebody who has also received a transmission. Usually it's going to go from an elder to a younger. Usually it's going to be a grandmother to a granddaughter, but not always. And it can only be transmitted on certain days, the most common being Christmas Eve at midnight.
Mm, hmm.
And the words are secret. So there's a secret prayer and it's only told between the person who transmit it to the person that they're transmitting it to.
Hmm.
So, and there's several of these practices for a variety of different ailments. Um, there is a word for that has been used to describe this, and it's called segnatura, which if I think if you translate it literally means signature, but that's not the translation. Segnatura is a set of practices that involve um, gestures, usually the sign of the cross, prayers, some secret, but often um, that always to the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, or a specific saint. And then sometimes objects or herbs or other substances like oil, salt, water. Sometimes grain, um, sometimes sometimes there could be scissors, there could be knives, there could be other
Mm-hmm.
things used to um, break curses, spells, as well as make them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so
Oh my
the
gosh, there's so much here.
there is, I know. Go
Yeah.
ahead. I know you probably have questions. I'm just talking, but go ahead.
Well, if there was more right there, go. I want to hear it.
I was just gonna say that like so when we talk about like Italian folk medicine or Italian, or witchcraft, as it's often referred to, we're talking about a bunch of things, including these practices that are actually Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, let me go from there. Um, because I think from maybe the like more Northern European um history and the witch trials and all that kind of thing, there's the antagonism or the like relationship of persecution and like yeah antagonism or antithesis between like the organized Christian church and what we're calling witchcraft. And so are you saying like so in what we're now calling Italy, where these medicine women, it sounds like mostly women,
Yeah, but not always.
okay,
There's a lot of as well.
medicine folk,
Hmm.
they themselves didn't have a distinction between like their magic practice and like their faith practice. That was and was
They
that well
still don't.
known?
This is still
They
being practiced.
don't. Yeah, okay. And so is that, I mean, like, what did priests say about that? Or like, was there a backlash or like,
Well, the
or was it
priests
just
were
like,
no, they were this is part so
yeah,
no, this was part of their Catholicism.
yeah, okay, okay, so interesting. Yeah.
And even though, one of the another one of the I don't know, I say famous, but I sometimes it might just be because of
Famous within the niche.
yeah, with Um, it's known as tarantismo, which is the in the US and diaspora where we get the tarantella.
Oh yeah, okay.
Um, One of these involves ecstatic um, music. It goes back to the rites of Dionysus,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a purification process that sometimes would go on for days and days. Usually it was women who were afflicted. So the mythology is that um, when you are bitten by, depending on the myth, it's the wolf spider or a tarantula, you get sick and you do this dance to get rid of the sickness. But
Yeah.
um, it's a spiritual sickness. It goes back to possession it actually goes back to the Orphics in the rites of Dionysus and the rites of propitiation.
Mm.
Um, so before Christianity, the idea was in order if you were possessed by like a god like Dionysus, you couldn't exorcise them. You had to propitiate them. And then Christianity came along and said, "Oh, we can just exorcise them," and then they got really popular because people
Wait,
like
what is perpetuate?
propitiate means you make a deal,
Oh, okay.
right? So you go through, and so this was a regular practice that was done. So somebody was afflicted somehow, whether it was the bite of the proverbial spider, right? Something happened to them that was a trauma, whether it was a spiritual trauma or something that actually happened to them. And then the tarantella, the rites of the tarantella were performed so that this person could get rid of this poison.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This involved ecstatic dancing, convulsions, um, musicians that would play for 3 days in a row. And
Mm-hmm.
often they would bring these people to the church. Um, so then you would see this happening in the church where
Mm-hmm.
there's videos of this. Ernesto De Martino did a documentary about it. You can YouTube it
Mm.
and see the whole community would gather around this person. And they have video footage of women climbing the walls in the
Mm.
church. They were the community would hold them, would make sure that they didn't hurt themselves. So they
Oh,
basically would be in like an
an altered
ecstatic
state.
trance.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so the deity associated is Saint Paul. Um, and so St. Paul, usually you'll see pictures of St. Paul and the petitioner, the person with the affliction, will be asking St. Paul to heal them. Um, so, and I'm sharing this because this was actually part of their Catholicism.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there wasn't any dissonance.
Yeah.
This is not to this day. Mostly this is not happening. The last like vestiges of the Tarantella are in Galatina, in Puglia, in the Salento area, um, where people are still practicing it, but not in the way that it was traditionally.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there were certain people in the community, and they were Taranta. They were the people who every year did this, went through this
Mm.
process for everybody.
Mm. Wow. That is so archetypal and
Yeah, definitely look it up. If you look up the Taranta Project, Ernesto Di Martino. You can find it easy on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's striking me about this, um, like I think I've shared this, and it was definitely part of the retreat that you did with me. Like my return to Catholicism and to Christianity, like in that return to it, more through my direct experience, I've come to a place of synthesis with like, what we might be calling witchcraft and the faith, where there is no dissonance for me personally, um, but it's taken it definitely has not come from it being modeled that way, or from being a part of a cultural paradigm where that was still held. Um, and I'm thinking about the kind of this movement towards ancestral practice, um, in the West, in the United States. In my world, it's particularly kind of this movement from, um, you know, white activists trying to find their roots, and to, have a different relationship with our own identities, um, that's that allows for, more resilience, more sense of selfhood, self-worth than just like the whiteness that we've been
Mhm.
acculturated into. And I think I think most commonly when a person, a white person or a white enculturated person is asked about like ancestry, it the go-to is like ancestry DNA, or like what do I know intellectually about, like, well, my grandmother, my grandfather, da da da. Um, and and I think there's, for many folks, a sense of even that being very limited. Um, and I guess, well, one thing I'm hearing about, and maybe you can decide which way you want to, how you want to respond, which direction you want to respond. And one thing I'm hearing is like, I mean, it's clear you have a profound intellectual knowledge and you've done a lot of learning and study in that, archival way. And I also, both from the work that I know that you do and the ethnobotany piece and, place-based, I mean, you talk about it as an emerging, um, practice, an emerging way of life. And, you drawing from direct experience with people who live and lived with these traditions. Um, so I guess what I'm pulling out from that is like the difference between intellectual knowledge of a tradition and transmission, or like a intuitive sensing and an intuitive relationship with land and plants and entities, deities, with a saint, um, and just how that, I think, I imagine, adds a texture, um, a groundedness, or I don't know, like there's something that feels very rich in that I think is so longed for in a lot of the folks of European descent, um, for whom, like, if we think about just like the enclosure of the commons, I think in England that was in like the 1600s.
Yep.
And the distance, like the ancestral memory of like what communal living or what subsistence living or what relationship to land really looked like is so much more distant. So that's just like an interest an interesting piece I'm hearing you share. Um, And the other piece that I was feeling was, well, it's gone right now. So maybe if there's anything you want to respond to in that part, um, like the integration of direct experience and direct sensing. Well, I guess one more thing I'll say about that is in reference to people you work with, or um, like who aren't coming with that like enclave direct pool of, you know, what I imagine for you were just like commonplace um, daily rituals. And not, I mean, we call them rituals now because there's a distinction from like how we live, but that wasn't the case.
No.
Um, so yeah, how do you work with people around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so there's a few ways.
For part 2 of my interview with Lisa, stay tuned for the next episode. You've been listening to Priestess of Ordinary Things, a podcast for spiritual misfits, modern mystics, and folks of all genders tasked with tending the sacred in everyday life. If you're a spiritual misfit who feels lost, stuck, or hungry for connection and wanting more resources for being more grounded in your relationship to your body and to the earth, go to my website at www.katefontana.com/earth-magic and get the free gift I created just for you. It's called Earth Magic, 3 simple celebrations of spiritual nourishment. Also, make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if there's something you heard here that was meaningful to you, please let me know in the comments. I read all of them, and it really helps me know that I'm speaking to real people and not just out into empty space. Lastly, if there's someone in your life you think could benefit from what you heard here, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with them. You belong here. Don't give up. May we dance through these times, awake and together.